everyone, and welcome to Blue Bench Season 2. My name is Georgia Hawthorne. I'm the Gail Stoltz Fellow and Social Media Manager for the Montana Democratic Party.
Hi, I'm Shannon O'Brien. I'm a former legislator, I'm a mom, I'm a former teacher, and a statewide candidate.
Moving forward, we're going to be splitting the podcast into 2 episodes to make sure that you have all of the information that you need to know. And trust us, we know it can be a lot. Shannon and I are going to recap state and national politics from the past week, and Gabby is going to continue doing interviews with Montanans, showcasing the impacts that politics really do have. Shannon, you ready to dive in?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, we gotta start with the gross demonstration of greed from Donald Trump this week. First of all, that man does not need another freaking plane. Second of all, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm pretty sure accepting a gift of that kind of magnitude from a foreign country, no less, is unconstitutional. What's your take?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that I want to highlight to start with are the questions from both sides of the aisle in Congress, that both Republicans and Democrats were pretty upset and had high concerns about the constitutionality of it. There is clarity around this. The writers of the Constitution knew that it was bad news to receive big gifts, or really gifts of any kind, from kings or foreign leaders. And so that was made very, very clear by our founding fathers. To the tune of $400 million puts it into a whole different ballgame. And, I've read that Trump and his folks are backpedaling and trying to find different ways to make it legal, that maybe he wouldn't keep it, that it would go as part of his library or something along those lines. Time will tell. But when we start accepting gifts of any size, but certainly to that magnitude, it's really tough not to have a conflict of interest, or even the perception of a conflict of interest and biases. This is, unconstitutional, absolutely. And it's the commander-in-chief's job to stay within the Constitution. But I'd also say the optics, the ethics are nasty.
I mean, Shannon, we're not talking about like a lobbyist lunch here. We're talking about a foreign country giving the president a new Air Force One. And Air Force One is one of the most technologically advanced airplanes in the world. So how do they plan on taking this gift and turning it into a plane that the president flies around the world in?
Yeah, I've understood to retrofit it, to make it, to debug it, make sure it's clean, and to make sure it's safe for our president. It could be upwards of $1 billion to get that set up. And I'll just point out that our great Senator Jon Tester, he and his staff had a policy that they couldn't have a lunch. They would accept no gifts whatsoever, including a free meal of any type, and which is above and beyond the congressional rules. But I think it helped keep people clean.
Well, Shannon, when the Trump administration isn't blatantly violating the Constitution, they're finding loopholes around it. Last week, Donald Trump's Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, said that they were actively looking for ways to suspend habeas corpus. And that sounds bad. I'm pretty sure the last time habeas corpus was suspended in the US was after Pearl Harbor back in the 40s, and that was the start of Japanese internment camps in the US. And that's not something I would put on our highlight reel. What is habeas corpus? And do we need to be worried?
There are so many things that are happening coming out of the White House that are high concern. In fact, a close friend of mine who's been paying attention for a long time, we were on a walk a couple weeks ago, and she stopped me in the middle of the walk and she said, "Shannon, how scared are you? How scared?" When what she was asking was, how scared should I be?
I've been getting that question from quite a few of my family and friends too.
Yeah. And my gut response is do not fear. Do not fear. And I'll say this now, I'll say it again, over and over again. It's pay attention to what's happening, because it's real. And I think our gut response to this is we see it and then just to send it away and stay engaged in our little activities and show up at the basketball game and the baseball games and the things that, invite people over, and just kind of ignore it because it's so shocking and so disturbing, and we don't know what to do with it. There's
Right.
this, we just can't figure that out. But it's real, and it's really happening. And so telling our listeners and anyone else who will hear is that, number one, pay attention, but number two, show up.
Mm-hmm.
Start going to events, if you don't know what to do, just start showing up. Show up at your local Democratic Party monthly meeting, or start showing up with friends. Grab a couple of friends who are struggling with this as well. But I will share with you, this is one of the top 5 hottest issues in my heart, of greatest concern, that if you start taking away due process,
right,
and you start taking people and incarcerating them for no apparent reason, and no due process, no trial, no warrant, no cause, then all of a sudden we get into a really scary point in our world. And we live within this 300-mile range of a border,
right,
that if we're walking around without proper papers, which means our passports that show our citizenship, then we could be subject, any one of us could be subject to be detained. And, we saw it with the fellow in Whitefish recently, who was taken to Tacoma, and he was here legally. And then he was released without a cell phone, without ID, without any money, without a credit card,
right,
without anything. And he was just essentially left out on the street. And, those things are just not okay. And you're seeing families being split up, and just, there's no protection. So I think that my concern is we'll see more of this. And my hope is that we will see more people being shocked into doing something about it.
right. And the Trump administration is claiming that they're doing all of this to prevent immigration and stop the flow of illegal aliens across the border and all of these things. But there's nothing holding him to that. It's like me saying, oh, I'm only going to get the small ice cream, Mom, I promise. But if I drive myself there, there's nothing stopping me from getting a large one. And that's what it's like. And the thing about due process is that you and we're citizens. I don't know about you. I don't keep my passport on me at all times. And if I was to get detained and accused of being here illegally, I don't have my passport on me. Due process doesn't exist because habeas corpus is suspended. And I have no way to prove that I'm a US citizen. And I think that is the really, really scary thing if due process does go out the window.
And I'll add, as you know, that he has made it clear that there will be retribution for people who speak out against him, or people who don't vote the way he wants them to vote. So we're heading toward very much a fear-based society and government, which is not the way that we want to be. And these are our basic freedoms that our Constitution stands for and protects us.
Well, if that wasn't bad enough, Republicans in Congress are also actively trying to rip the general rights away of most Americans. This GOP budget that the House of Representatives has been marking up this week and is scheduled to have a vote coming here pretty soon, it's a nightmare, especially if you're not a billionaire. If you're a working mom, if you're a single parent, anything like that, this bill is not for you. And the big ticket item in the budget is these massive, massive cuts to Medicaid and SNAP, which is health insurance and food assistance for low-income folks. Shannon, what would cuts to Medicaid and SNAP, especially of this magnitude, what would that mean for Montana?
Yeah, great question. And, I'm going to start with the budget at any governmental level, whether it's your city government, county, state, or federal. It's really where you place your values. Right? It's how you're spending precious taxpayer dollars. And that's not to be taken lightly. What I will certainly say, and having served in the legislature, is we are all out of touch about what is really going on, especially in rural communities and Indian country and all sorts of, I mean, of course, by nature, we don't know what's happening except for our little microcosms. And I think that's our number one fault. And it's certainly the number one fault of the Republicans, who are very interested in tax cuts for the wealthiest. There's this theory of trickle-down economics that has been proven that it doesn't work. It was a Reaganomics concept that has been proven over and over again that it doesn't work. But if we give big tax cuts and cash in hand to our wealthiest, then they will hire people and that trickle down will take place. We know that doesn't work. So this is coming off the backs of our most vulnerable people in rural Montana. Will see, if these go through, we will see some of these, they're called critical access hospitals. These small clinics will be shutting down. They're barely making it as it is. We will see more more elder care facilities shutting down. So instead of having your mom who's 95 who needs full-time care, instead of having her in Glasgow, just half a mile from you, she's going to have to move down to Billings, which is, hours of driving to get there. So it's just quite frankly heartbreaking. And I think, we're talking about for like the SNAP, the food nutrition program, we're talking about families of 4 who are living on salaries, combined salaries, if they have 2 people contributing, of $25,000, under $30,000 a year.
Right.
And if you start to do the math and you think through how much goes toward rent, and if you can find a home because of the housing crisis, and the cost of living and the cost of a dozen eggs, this is not extravagant living. This is not, and not only that, the program has an employment component where people need to be actively looking for work if they don't have work already. So I think there's this very strong misnomer with Republicans that they're just looking for a government handout. And that's not what's happening. These people are in that poverty cycle, and it's our responsibility to make sure they don't become homeless and that they have food to feed the children.
Right. The thing that absolutely breaks my heart is that we can sit here and talk about these cuts to the budget that would make kids who would go hungry through no fault of their own.
I know.
And yet, at the same time, these same people turn around and offer Elon Musk $100 billion contracts.
Yeah.
That figure is probably not correct, but I don't understand how you can have 2 options, and it's pay billionaires more money or feed hungry kids. You don't pick feed hungry kids every single time.
Yeah. With, a little happy note there of Melissa Romano had a bill to help with the food service program for kids in schools, and it passed. Major victory to minimize the bureaucracy and the red tape for families to get into those food nutrition programs and allow them, because those of us who have been teachers know that if a child walks in the door to the classroom not having had breakfast and expecting them to focus on their work and have a productive hour if they're in high school, or a productive day, it's not happening. And then if they don't have a lunch, and I don't know how, all teachers that I know always have a stash of food because they're in a situation where a lot of the kids just can't do it.
So they're proposing that we take away healthcare and food for poor folks so that we can give tax breaks to billionaires. I'm going to be wrapping my head around that one for a really long time, but I'll get back to you when it makes sense to me.
Good.
They've crashed the stock market. They've wiped out everybody's retirement accounts. Prices are going up across the board because of this silly trade war.
Yeah.
And now they want to make it even harder for working people.
Yeah.
Let me just say, I miss when the Republican Party had morals and values, because unfortunately, Medicaid and SNAP aren't the only targets in this. Shannon, tell me what else is in this budget that's specifically going to impact the most vulnerable.
Okay, I'm going to say those people who are in either 2-year education or 4-year education, so for the trades, or for 4-year education, healthcare, our nurses, student loans are going to get worse.
Great.
Yeah, it's the truth. College is horribly unaffordable for so many people to begin with. And now it's going to be even more unaffordable because those student loans will not be subsidized as well. And there are programs. I actually worked for, they're called TRIO programs, Upward Bound and Student Support Services, that help people who have never, they're the first in their family to go to college. They're ethnic minority, low income folks who have no idea where to even start thinking about applying for scholarships or anything along those lines, and just helping them with tutoring or whatever it might be. So those programs are going away. So not only will it be unaffordable, but it'll only be for the elite class, so to speak. Our communities, especially our small communities, rely on business development grants or business development programs that might just give them technical assistance of how to be an entrepreneur, how to start up a business, what are the steps, how to get a tax ID number, what do I need at the state level to get a license, how does this work, right? And then let alone $5,000 or $10,000 loan to get the widgets, or to get the equipment that I need, or to get the rent to start this business. And many of those, it looks like, those programs are going away. So in order to start a business and engage in the economy, which will have impact on the economy, but also certainly targeted at those areas that need it the most.
Right, because if you live in eastern Montana and you live 3 hours from Billings and your hardware store goes under and no one has the spare change or the government assistance to open a new hardware store, what are you going to do? Your barn goes out, you've got no wood, and then you're looking at a 3-hour drive to Billings just to pick up basics. So what I'm gathering as the moral of this story is that these clowns could not be further out of touch from what their constituents actually need and want. So here's our call to action for this episode, and I'm talking to y'all. I need you guys to call Zinke and Downing ASAP. This full floor vote is expected before Memorial Day, so make sure they hear your thoughts in advance of that. I'm going to drop the office phone numbers in the description of this podcast, and even if you catch a voicemail, which honestly is probably pretty likely, leave a message with your name and your zip code, and that message will be counted.
And I'll add to that, because I hear so many people say, does it really matter? Do they really care? Having worked for Governor Bullock, and I know other elected officials do this, most of them do this to my knowledge, is they have a constituency services program, and they report in to the senator, to the congressman, to the governor, whoever it is. We had 83 calls this week against the proposed budget. We had 10 in support of the budget. So whether they vote with that or without that, they have that data. So strongly encourage people to make those phone calls or send those emails.
Absolutely. Well, Shannon, I have officially reached my max on talking about Donald Trump and his cronies for the day. What's happening in Montana now that the legislative session's out?
So I'll share that overall, in general, we had a much better legislative session for Democrats and Democratic values, for our strong schools, for healthcare, for, we didn't get as far as we wanted on property taxes for sure. Got a couple of good steps taken for housing, but for the issues that we heard about, there were loads of distractions that were ridiculous. A ridiculous way to spend our time, legislators' time. But we saw some great bills that were passed by Democrats in education for certain. I'm really grateful for increased pay for teachers. And there's a inflationary adjustment cap for school districts for funding. And that was honored and recognized and increased. And when inflation's at 7% and your cap is at 2 or 3%, where's that money going to come from to pay the bills, to pay for the lights, literally. So there were a number of good bills for education that Democrats supported and introduced and paid off. So I was really grateful to see that. Some of the things that passed that were not good for Montanans in general. One is a voter ID bill. I'm sure you heard about.
Yep.
And so now you have to show not just you have to show ID, and you have to show proof of residence, like an envelope that has your from a power bill or a water bill or something. And it's just more hoops that people have to go through in order to vote. And, voting is sensitive and private. And when voting laws are messed with every single legislative session, it is not good for voters. It turns them off. And what we want to do, I don't care who you are, we want people to vote. That's how the whole thing works. And we have voter apathy that we're fighting. And we certainly have voters who get confused about when voting. Like now you can't register to vote after noon on election day. And, they're just unnecessary. They're unnecessary bills. So, and they go along with this voter fraud conspiracy theory.
Election integrity.
And it does, we have phenomenal professionals who do amazing work. And as elected officials, we are invited ahead of time to see what the process is and to observe. And if we're not running, we can observe while it's in there, and there's full transparency there, and they're very professional. So that was a discouragement too. I did like to see the doula bill. Senator Cora Newman, who was a freshman and very effective legislator, was able to pull that bill through that really makes sense for so many. It's so much more affordable for people who have healthcare that's not as robust as needed. And there's continuity, and, so there's statistics that, significantly decreases the number of cesarean sections and some of those kinds of things. So that was a big win as well.
That doula bill was probably my highlight of this week. That was my bright spot of this week, because also in that bill, it allows doulas to be professionally licensed, where that wasn't a thing before. And because they're professionally licensed, now their patients can bill through Medicaid and private insurance, which really expands access to that kind of care.
And then last, I'll mention the property tax, which was by far and wide the hottest issue when you saw people have their property taxes skyrocket by 40% in some counties, or over 40% in some counties. I had constituents, literally multiple constituents, calling me in tears, asking what can be done, because they were going to have to leave the homes that they had been living in for 20, 30, 40 years because they couldn't afford, they were on a fixed income and they couldn't afford the property tax.
I heard stories on the campaign trail of people who had been retired for years and had to choose to go back to work because they couldn't afford to pay the property tax bill.
Yeah. When you're talking about thousands of dollars. So there was an enormous amount of work that was done. In many ways, maybe it was a day late and a dollar short, but the legislature came to some agreements on creating different tiers. So higher valued homes have a higher rate, and second homes have a much higher rate, which makes sense. But it's also, you think about the families who've been in Montana for a few generations, and the family that inherited the small cabin on the lake. So therefore that property is worth a lot of money. And then all of a sudden, so do they have to sell the family cabin that's been in for generations? So there were some challenges there. There will be a one-time only $400 rebate and for people who are living for the homes, but you have to register for it. So a reminder in August to register for that, and you should get something in the mail just like it was done before. And for those of you who have neighbors who aren't quite as tech savvy, help them out. Remind them, get online with them if need be, because there are so many people who have property who don't know how to get online and get their account set up and get that taken care of. So to get that $400.
Well, that's a great reminder for everybody, Shannon. But there's one area of state politics that I think has a huge impact on Montanans, but a lot of the time it flies under the radar because it's not a Senate office or the governor or something like that. And that's the Public Service Commission. It's more commonly called the PSC. And the PSC regulates rates for utilities in Montana. And Northwestern Energy has been a big name in their agenda lately. And we're going to be keeping tabs on the PSC as we do these episodes to ensure accountability there. But do you have any idea what's going on with the PSC right now? I know there was a huge, it was like a 28% increase way back in 2023, but do we have any news since then?
Yeah, so the PSC basically protects everyone from a monopoly of a public service. So even taxis, if they provide a service, then there's something that is under the purview of the Public Service Commission. Most often we have been impacted by rate hikes. And those rate hikes have been very damaging to homeowners and renters. Those of us who get the power bills, see those power bills go up and up and up and up.
No kidding.
And it's, there again, I hear people who just can't afford it. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. So, and those PSC commissioners are elected.
Right.
So, and they hold a great deal of power. There is another vote on a rate coming up. There was a meeting that was canceled. I'm unclear why. I don't know if you know anything about it. Yeah. We'll just have to see what happens there and what happens next. But again, communicate with those commissioners. Make sure, because as you mentioned already, it's off the radar for a lot of folks. They don't understand what it is, or they'll blame the city council members, or blame state legislators or the governor, and it's like, not on this one. This one is the Public Service Commission. So Google Public Service Commissioners Montana, and you'll find them and you'll be able to communicate with them.
Well, thanks for explaining all of that, Shannon, because energy rates can be so important here in Montana, especially when we have really hard winters. I live in like a 700 square foot apartment. It's a 1-bedroom apartment. And I like my house cold. I usually keep it like between 68 and 70 degrees. So I don't blast the heat in the winter. My electric bill was almost $200 for 1 month in my 700 square foot apartment for a girl who doesn't use the heat very often. And that is why tuning into things like this is so important for folks, because these are the real impacts that you see on the back end.
Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, Shannon, is there anything else you want to leave our listeners for today?
Yeah, I guess two things, and I kind of covered them a little bit before, but I really hope people are able to do two things. One is pay attention, whether that's, Montana Free Press or whatever your news source is, NPR, no matter, just pay attention. Don't tune it out. Notice the emotions that it kicks in. Notice it and honor it. And then show up. Number one rule in politics is showing up. And you can armchair quarterback all day long, complain about what Trump's doing, complain about what the governor's doing, complain about what the Republicans are doing all day long. Mm-hmm. You can do that. But unless you're willing to get involved, find a candidate that you can get behind and volunteer for them. Find an organization or a group that gets voter registration at whatever it is. Show up when you hear about something and stay involved, and you'll hear us talk about that as we continue on this. But that's the big plug. That's the goal, is to have people engaged. A democracy, this is a republic. It's based on participation of the citizens. We can't vote them in or not vote them in and then let them go.
Right? It doesn't work when you don't participate.
That's right.
And it can be really hard to know where to start because there are so many options. If anyone ever needs help finding something in their community to get them involved, you can always, always, always shoot us an email at info@montanademocrats.org, and we'll get you plugged in wherever you think you'll fit best. That's it. That's all, folks. Thanks for joining us on the Blue Bench, and make sure you tune in later this week for Gabby's interview. Bye.
Thanks.